When Lu Xinru woke up, she was surprised to find that Yanzi was already awake. "Good morning, Sister Yanzi," she greeted with a smile. "Morning, aren't you going to sleep a bit more?" It had been over 2 hours since Yanzi was startled awake in the early hours. The sleepiness that had slipped away earlier was now starting to return. Lu Xinru knew that if she wanted to continue sleeping, Yanzi wouldn't object. But what about the resolve she had just made? She stood up, stretched, and shook her head to dispel the drowsiness. "No, Sister Yanzi, I want to ask if there's something I can do. I don't want to be idle all day." More importantly, Lu Xinru didn't want to rely on Yanzi all the time. From the moment she woke up, Yanzi had extended a helping hand, and Lu Xinru naturally relied on her. For the past few days, she had been waking up naturally, finding no one in the room when she did. Yanzi would leave breakfast on the table for her, and after she ate, she would go to the treehouse Yanzi often visited. Then, Yanzi would take her around the camp to familiarize her with the environment, greet the various people working, or learn some simple skills before having lunch and dinner together, thus passing the day. While it was true that her body needed proper recovery after being awakened from the ice, she didn't want things to continue like this indefinitely. She had to become independent as soon as possible. Not to mention, when she saw the doctor dining with the concubine yesterday, Lu Xinru realized that if she didn't occupy Yanzi's time all day, Yanzi might have been having meals or meetings with the leader. Because she was the youngest among those awakened in the camp, many people unconsciously treated her with extra care. But she couldn't be satisfied with this and accept the gifts from others as a matter of course. She also wanted to help them, especially Yanzi and the doctor. Seeing Lu Xinru's expression, Yanzi knew what she was thinking. In this camp, those who survived were mostly determined to live well, which united them under the leader's guidance. Everyone had their tasks, working together to live better lives. Yanzi also knew that indulging Lu Xinru wasn't beneficial for her. Although she didn't want to make things too hard for her since she had just awakened, seeing the seriousness in Lu Xinru's eyes, she nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to the leader." Having achieved her goal, Lu Xinru was noticeably happier. She and Yanzi washed their faces with cool stream water and used a rough, leaf-bound branch as a toothbrush. After freshening up, they headed to the communal dining area. It was her first time joining the morning gathering. The air around was a bit chilly but exceptionally fresh, with occasional bird calls from the forest. Despite the peaceful atmosphere, thinking about the priest slitting his throat here yesterday dampened her mood considerably. It wasn't to the point where she couldn't eat, as she didn't know the priest personally, but her previously elated mood calmed down significantly. Compared to the midday and evening gatherings, fewer people attended breakfast. The numbers were half of what they had been last night. The doctor and the merchant were absent, but the leader and Eagle Eye were seated in their usual spots. The concubine, who was sitting alone, warmly waved them over when she saw them. The concubine had a very outgoing personality, even more so than Yanzi, and she took good care of Lu Xinru. When Yanzi was busy, she would often entrust Lu Xinru to her. Upon hearing that Lu Xinru wanted to work, the concubine asked, "Zirui, what kind of work do you want to do?" Lu Xinru hadn't really thought about it. "What kind of work can I do? There's a shortage of people everywhere." The concubine shrugged and explained the division of labor in the camp. In the camp, under the leader, there were generally 3 main groups: the hunting team, the gathering team, and the logistics team, led by Bear, Eagle Eye, and the merchant, respectively. Yanzi managed all the women. The hunting team frequently went out, returning to the camp every 10 days or so. Each time, they left with over 10 people, but a couple of them would always be missing upon return, and a third would be injured. As a result, the survivors of the hunting team held the highest status in the camp, second only to the leader and team leaders. Even the women were eager to be with these strong men who could provide them with extra food and supplies. The gathering team was the largest group. Besides collecting wild vegetables, fruits, and useful plants, some members were responsible for fishing. The logistics team's work was more varied, including storing and distributing supplies, washing clothes, weaving, cooking, repairing the camp, and handling miscellaneous tasks not covered by the other 2 teams. There were also specialists like the doctor, the prophet, and the former priest who had special abilities and reported directly to the leader, not falling under the 3 main groups. The concubine's explanation was simple and clear. Lu Xinrui roughly understood that Yanzi belonged to the logistics team, specifically in weaving. Her daily work involved using soft plant fibers to weave the fabric for their clothes in a very primitive manner, and she could even knit sweater-like garments. Of course, these couldn't compare to truly soft clothes. No matter how soft the plant fibers were, they had a limit, making the clothes more like soft armor. Therefore, everyone wore an inner garment made from plant fibers underneath. I'm part of the gathering team, the concubine added. If you haven't decided yet, you can try either the gathering or logistics team. Yanzi and I will look after you. Lu Xinrui was curious. Are there no women in the hunting team? Although women were generally weaker in combat than men, many had high spirits and were not inferior to men in various aspects. Staying home and being protected wasn't their motto. Lu Xinrui had assumed many women would join the hunting team, thinking they'd want to protect themselves with their own hands. The concubine was silent for a moment. No, there are no women in the hunting team now. I used to be part of it but quit. Why did she quit? Lu Xinrui didn't ask further, sensing the concubine's slight sadness. Seeing her hesitation, the concubine forced a bitter smile and continued, at first, many women wanted to join the hunting team, including me, but the casualties were too high. One of my friends, in the end, the leader persuaded us to leave to avoid further loss of the already scarce women. Lu Xinrui nodded and, after some thought, smiled apologetically. I'll join the gathering team. I can't do anything else. Before this, she was just a high school junior. Her life was no different from that of an ordinary girl, with her loving grandmother taking care of all the household chores. She had rarely cooked or done laundry herself. It wasn't that she was unfilial, but whenever she tried to help, her grandmother would always smile and send her back to study. But studying was now useless. Chinese, math, foreign languages. None of these were of any use in this world. Had she known, she would have insisted on learning to cook from her grandmother instead. The concubine was delighted. So you'll be with me? I'll go say hello to Eagle Eye, Yanzi said, looking a bit concerned. Lu Xinrui then realized that joining the gathering team meant working under Eagle Eye. Frankly, Eagle Eye wasn't unattractive. In fact, he could be considered quite handsome with his peach blossom eyes, but that was precisely the problem. Such features often reminded people of playboys. Although Lu Xinrui had little interaction with him, she instinctively felt wary. Well, this was a kind of judging by appearance. Yanzi walked over to the leader's table, spoke with the leader and Eagle Eye for a few moments, and both men looked over. The leader nodded to her, and Eagle Eye gave an okay gesture with a smile. After breakfast, the concubine took Lu Xinrui to the gathering team's meeting place, where Eagle Eye was already present. Along the way, the concubine shared a lot of gossip. Apparently, Eagle Eye used to be the deputy leader of the hunting team and had participated in many hunts. Until recently, when the former gathering team leader died unexpectedly, he was transferred to lead the gathering team. The foreign brothers who woke up with her decided to join the hunting team, having practiced free fighting before. The leader and Bear, the hunting team leader, were old friends, and Bear was a giant over 2 meters tall. These stories gave her a more concrete understanding of the camp. With the chatty concubine, who was indeed quite gossipy, Lu Xinrui's anxiety was somewhat alleviated. Soon, they arrived at the gathering team's meeting place, which had already gathered over 30 people, 5 of whom were women. I've heard you're joining the gathering team, Zirui. Eagle Eye walked over. Then you'll start with me and the concubine. You don't have much experience yet. Great, being in our team means I can look after you, the concubine said. Okay, Lu Xinrui nodded, accepting the arrangement without objection. Since Yanzi wasn't in the gathering team, she was most familiar with the concubine here. Being in the same team was comforting, despite her wariness of Eagle Eye. Then it's decided, Eagle Eye smiled. Though it was still a business-like smile, it wasn't annoying once you got used to it. After greeting the concubine, he returned to the center of the meeting place. Eagle Eye clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. All right, today we proceed as usual. The teams and their designated areas remain unchanged. Also, we have a new member today. She's the youngest in our camp, so take good care of her. His words drew everyone's attention to Lu Xinrui, making her a bit uncomfortable. Fortunately, the crowd soon dispersed, and Eagle Eye's team gathered around. Hey, you did that on purpose, didn't you? The concubine teased. I didn't. I was just being considerate, making sure everyone looks after her. Eagle-Eye shrugged innocently. All right, Zirui, let me introduce you. This is Ashen, Tiayi, and you already know the concubine and me. Ashen, a man who looked nearly 30, nodded at her steadily. Tiayi, a young man in his early 20s, shyly scratched his head. After they got acquainted, Eagle-Eye waved his hand. All right, let's start today's work. Along the way, Lu Xinru learned from Eagle-Eye that while gathering was considered the simplest job with the most participants, it wasn't as easy as it seemed. Lu Xinru's grandfather was a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. Although she hadn't formally studied medicine, she knew a lot about plants, especially those with medicinal value, due to her upbringing. But half an hour into the gathering, most of the plants she saw were strange and unfamiliar. The few that looked familiar couldn't be confirmed as the same species she knew. Eagle-Eye's first lesson was not to eat any plant or fruit he hadn't told her was safe. When you woke up, it was a time when resources were relatively abundant. At the beginning, we didn't have enough food or clothing and didn't know which plants were edible. Our current knowledge is built on the experiences of those before us, many of whom died from eating the wrong plants. Eagle-Eye's rare serious expression emphasized the importance of his warning. In the early days, due to food shortages, many starving people took risks with unknown plants and fruits. Every now and then, someone would eat something poisonous. The lucky ones only had diarrhea for a few days, the unlucky ones died. So, don't try anything I haven't approved. Understanding the gravity of his words, and with her family background, Lu Xinru solemnly promised. Eagle-Eye then smiled, resuming his usual demeanor, and he and the concubine began teaching her about various plants, including which ones were safe and which ones were dangerous. Each member of the gathering team carried a basket on their back, similar to a medicine basket but made from a vine-like material since there were no bamboos available. Most baskets were crude and uncomfortable, made by inexperienced hands. Lu Xinru's basket, made by Yanzi when she used to gather, wasn't much better in appearance but at least wasn't uncomfortable to wear. In this camp, most people were preserved in life-sustaining pods. Although a pod wasn't extremely expensive, the cheapest model cost 100,000 yuan, and the life-sustaining liquid needed regular refills, making it affordable mainly to mid- to high-level professionals. For these people, weaving clothes and baskets, gathering all day, or fishing without tools were completely new tasks. But human potential is limitless, and after some adaptation, most had adjusted to this life. Lu Xinru also needed to adapt. Previously, Lu Xinru's physical fitness was already quite good among her peers. But compared to most people here, she was at a disadvantage. The survival rate from the life-sustaining pods was only about 10% or even lower. Many who didn't make it lacked the physical resilience to endure the long-term freezing. Hence, those who survived had excellent physical conditions. Lu Xinru was different. Her survival was more due to her special life-sustaining pod than her physical fitness, allowing her to live among people in their prime with only her 17-year-old body. Following Eagle-Eye and the concubine through the thick branches was something she had never tried before. Aishan occasionally helped her since she wasn't used to this mode of travel and often missed her footing on the round branches, risking a fall. Yanzi had taken her on short jumps like this before, but only for a while and always staying close to prevent falls. This long, continuous movement was a first for her. There were occasional animal sightings in the forest below, but like the plants, none were familiar. After about 10 nerve-wracking minutes, they finally reached their destination, a giant tree bearing many long green fruits.